Hi everybody, my name's Sean McDonald and I'll be your moderator here for the next 15 minutes. Our webinar today is titled 8 Steps to Building Your Annual Operating Plan. Firstly, thanks for attending today. We really appreciate the effort you've made to be here. And during our session, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We'll be answering these during our session and try to get through as many of these as we have time for. And finally, if you stay through to the end, which we hope you will do, and as is customary for our Board Pro webinars, we have a special treat for you. By answering our 1-minute survey at the end of the webinar, you'll go into our draw to win a beautiful gift hamper worth over $400. Now, for those who haven't met Board Pro yet, we're a board software provider that serve around 20,000 users around the world. We enable organizations to prepare for and run their board meetings more efficiently and effectively with clever software with less time and deliver more impact and value for their organization. And as much as we're a board software provider, part of our wider mission is to make the fundamentals of governance free and easy to implement for all organizations, especially those with resource constraints. So please sit back and take in as much information as you can. Everything you see here today will be sent to you via email, a recording of the webinar, a copy of the ebook and guide, which includes the many planning templates that Brett and Stephen and Linda will talk about over the next 40 minutes. And above all, any questions of our panelists, please use the Q&A buttons at the bottom of your screen. Now, let me introduce you to our presenter and panelists for today's webinar. Brett Hergt is the co-founder and CEO here at Board Pro. Brett's a serial entrepreneur, having built several high-growth businesses over the last 20 years. And Brett brings tenacity, a strategic mindset, strong generalist business skills, and an enduring curiosity to the webinar table. Hello, Brett.
Kia ora and welcome, everyone.
Stephen Bowman is Managing Director of Conscious Governance and brings a great depth of experience with board reviews and strategic planning. Stephen has a wealth of executive and governance experience and has written over 14 books, would you believe, on governance and strategy. Good day to you, Stephen.
Hello, everyone.
And finally, Linda Carroll is CEO of Align Group. Linda has over 20 years governance experience combined with over 30 years working with boards, CEOs, and senior managers aligning strategy, governance, culture, and performance. Linda's experience spans the wide state sector and not-for-profit sector boards, and she is also an accredited foresight practitioner through the Institute of the Future, California, United States. Good afternoon to you, Linda.
Kia ora.
So right now, I shall hand over to Brett to get our webinar started. Over to you, Brett.
Great. So I'm going to kick straight off, everybody, by saying impossible to do, a full download and instructions on building an annual operating plan in 40 minutes. So we've got 8 steps we're going to go through. We're going to do about 3 or 4 minutes for each of them, and we'll try and work in the panelists as well. So this is a very broad brush overview. If you want to dig into this topic, I'd encourage you to read the white papers, ask Q&A as freely as you like during the session. And if we see a lot of demand, we may do a deep dive later. So essentially what you're seeing in front of you here is kind of the 8 steps I would go through if I was building an annual operating plan and doing it where, I had to build the foundations of alignment with board, reviewing the prior year, and doing a strategy refresh as well. I might just pause there and see if there's any reflections should we start with you, Linda?
Yes, one of the things that I think is, I find often in New Zealand is that we have a real propensity to jump straight into wanting to do the planning. And so I really encourage people, if you haven't done the strategy, which is the logic of why your organisation exists, then do pause and get the strategy done before you jump into the planning. It's my one insight.
Brilliant, thank you. We'll go to the next one, Stephen, and then we'll bring you in. Can we go next slide, Sean?
Certainly.
So as you approach the exercise, we were discussing yesterday in our dry run with the panelists, it's almost useless to do an operating plan, which kind of has this 1 year time frame almost always, unless you've got the foundations of a strategic plan and a set of purpose, vision, and values. You can see there on the slide, I like to think of those in terms of the time frames and the different owners for each of those different components. Stephen?
Yeah, I think if people, particularly those that are writing the operational plan, are always reminded that there are the 3 tiers in there. One of them is the 10 to 100 years, as you've got up there, which is our vision or our values or our purpose or whatever it might be. Here's the difference that we want to make. And then there's, in the next 2 or 3 years, here are the 3 or 4 or 5 key things the board have said we've got to get right over the next 3 years, which is your strat plan. And then with the operating plan, how are we going to actualize that in the next 12 months, given both the vision and also the strat plan? The power of the operating plan is that it gives voice to who the organization wants to be, the difference that you want to make. It's not just about activity, it's about how we go about doing something. And I think that's the power of the operating plan. It's not just a series of tasks, but we do it the way we do it because it's in alignment with our strategy and our vision and our values.
Very nice. Anything you wanted to add to that, Linda?
No, I think you said it all. Thanks, Steve.
Brilliant. Okay, let's move on to the next one, Sean. So in terms of step number 1, setting up the process, that my experience over many years doing these as a CEO is get going early. It always takes longer. You're effectively trying to produce a plan that the senior leadership team can own and drive. You want ideally with some input from the wider team, from the grassroots, and that can be well aligned with the strategic plan and that the board will endorse. So effectively almost organization wide. So you really want to start it early, get a basic plan and timeline in place, and ideally have some sort of structure or formula or template you're using, just so you're not making it all up as you're moving on and through. Let's go on. And then within I won't belabor any of these, but within the resources we've provided that you'll see various templates and resources that are available for you to pick up. They're usually in Word or whatever formats. You can customize those as you see fit. Go on to the next one, Sean. So tips, actually, what I'll do here is just open up to the panelists. Stephen, you might want to go first. Do you want to pick on one of these and just comment on it or ask questions amongst ourselves?
I mean, one of the things always is the engaging your functional leaders in developing up the operational plan. What I've always found, both as CEO and also chair of boards, is having these really powerful conversations with your functional leaders, because often if you're enabling them to unlock their wisdom of how things might be, then you can actually have a much more strategic conversation with them. So I think the engaging with the functional leaders side of things, and in particular mentoring them to think about not just activity after activity, but the bigger picture thing. In the scheme of our vision, in the scheme of our values, in the scheme of our strategy, what is it in your department that you think we've absolutely got to nail in this next 12 months? That'd be a fantastic conversation to have.
Yeah, I agree, Stephen. And the addition also of making sure that you have a very good, clear idea of your context. So what is the environment that you are actually operating in? And you've identified your strategy, which is your vision and values. You've identified your strategic plan. That's up to those out years. But what about that context? What has the future got barreling towards you? And don't forget that when you're getting into the nitty-gritty.
Brilliant. That takes us very nicely to our next step, I think, Sean, if you can advance us on through. So setting scope and constraints. So I kind of like to look at this in 2 phases. So when I'm producing an operational plan, I'm going to go through all that work of having my team leaders and teams have input and build up some goals, objectives, and some activities. I don't want to send them, down the garden path. So I like to know I've got a broad strategic, I'm aligned with my board before I set the team off and going. So I always, sometimes it's as simple as a 1-page briefing document, flick that round to the board. Is this the same as last year? Yes, it is. And then I'll send that off to the senior leadership team to say, here's your scope. within those that broad boundaries, go ahead and, we'll talk about the artifacts I get them to do, in a moment. So that broadly covers that one. Linda, anything you'd add here?
The only thing I'd add is if people haven't read the white paper, there's an acronym there about objectives and key results. So the OKRs in the briefing document. And I think that, again, is a critical aspect of setting the scene and context for people. I think it's a brilliant step. Thanks, Brett.
Brilliant.
What I'd add to that, Brett, too, is that what I've found, and this is really powerful, and it really starts to unlock the wisdom of your staff, your functional leaders, is to actually sit down with each of them and say, okay, so what is it that you can do in your department or in your area of responsibility that is actually going to help us get closer to this? Because often it's the senior executive sitting down and writing the operational plan. I'd rather sit down with the key leaders in areas. I remember once where I sat down with the receptionist and I said, look, here's our vision, here are our strategies. What can you do as a receptionist that will help move us to that? And she came up with some ideas that generated about $500,000.
Yeah, I love it, Stephen. One of my early pitfalls as CEO was going, this, strategy and operating plans are big things. I've got to take control. I want to write it, and then my insight over the years is to be a good facilitator, to allow the ideas to come up. Then the team leaders and the team feel so excited if they see their ideas flowing up. And often they're similar or the same as mine, and I might steer it a little bit, but you just get so much more engagement if a wider base is involved. So that's a long validation of what you just said, Stephen. So tips here. I think we're doing well for time. Let's have a look. Goal
business
setting.
Model canvas, Brett. Sorry.
Yes.
Can you talk about the business model canvas? I love that. I'm not sure what it is, but it sounds really enticing.
Wonderful. So I think around 10 years ago, a whole group of business consultants came together to say, how could you articulate, what a business, the way a business is functioning, what its model is in a single page. So it was a beautiful piece of work that essentially has 8-9 boxes in it. What's the problem you're trying to solve for a group of customers? What's the segment you're targeting? What's your unique value proposition? What's your revenue stream and your cost base? There was a wonderful iteration by a guy, Ash Moira, called the Lean Business Model Canvas, which is really good for startups early, and in fact, I find it in some ways superior for some situations. So I love to have a business model canvas as a background document for any planning, because it reminds everybody what's the fundamental business model. Because you get inbound executives, we've got a couple new in our organization, that they will have their own mental model, assumed, coming into the organization. So this gives great clarity about, well, what does the business do? Right, let's keep on going. So step number 3, review and critique. So this is just a simple step about if you're going to do planning for an upcoming year, pretty bloody good idea to look back in the past. Stephen, you've often had good input when we've talked about these things in the past. Do you want to elaborate a little on this for us?
Yeah, look, I think there's 2 elements. One of them is the beauty of knowing what's happened in the past, and the other one is the trap of knowing what's happened in the past. And so there's always those 2 elements of, the choices that we make now for the future, that they should be informed by the past, but not dictated by it. So I think one of the things that many organizations don't do is to actually capture what worked. Also, they don't capture what hasn't worked. They tend to ignore that and just move on. So what hasn't worked, and what did we learn from that? And then what did we miss last year? What are the things that we've missed last year because things have changed? And those 3 questions, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and what have we missed, then provides the impetus for actually developing up the next year as well.
Beautiful.
And in addition to that, Stephen, is the fact that if you want to be able to identify what didn't work, you need to make sure you've got really good measures so you can tell.
Yeah, lovely. Can you roll on to I think we've got, just a couple of tips here. See if we've covered this in our dialogue. Let's talk about this facilitator. I'd be interested to get your views, Stephen and Linda, on this. So if I've found over the years from experience, if I'm building up strategy, if you've got to do that heavy lifting, if there's contentious stuff that's difficult to talk about, having a facilitator is wonderful. If I'm just doing an operating plan update, I don't see the need to get that facilitator as frequently. Can we have some some tips from you? Start with you, Linda.
Look, I agree. When we're doing strategy, not only is it really helpful to have a facilitator so that the chief executive and all members of the board can actually contribute, but often when I'm doing strategy, I'll also get a couple of maybe customers as provocateurs to give us some views on how they are seeing their business changing in the future, and therefore what impact it's going to have on us when we're looking at our business for the future. So we can make sure we're adapting with a really good context in mind. And that, of course, provides your framing for your annual operating plan really well.
Lovely.
Yeah, what I'd add to that one is that you start where you need to start. I've had many CEO jobs, particularly in the non-for-profit, but also in family-owned businesses as well, and large corporates. And some of them have been very small, so you start where you start. So you start. I would then facilitate their first strategic plan, because the next one would be better, but at least we had something to begin with. The only advice I'd give to anyone listening to this, if you're going to get a strategic plan facilitator, make sure you get a good one, because most aren't. They just aren't.
We have a question. We have a question in from Cecile Recto, Brett. Can we use a logic model and treat it like a project? Would it be helpful?
Oh gosh, I'd have to know what Cecile, can we pause on that? And can you just put some notes in chat or Q&A about what you mean by a logic model? Unless Stephen or Linda, do you have an immediate take on that?
One of the comments that I've made, what I find astounding is that mostly what our staff do are projects. How many of them have ever done any formal project management training? The answer would be very, very few. So one of the things I've always found incredibly useful is for both myself and all of my staff to actually understand what is project management, because then you start to look at timeframes and outcome measures, and it's not just activity, it's about actually managing a project. So if in doubt, give them some project management training or some expertise in those areas. And then I think the logic behind how you go about running a project then becomes a lot simpler.
Great. I think that answers that.
Thanks, Stephen. And if we haven't covered that, Cecile, I think it was, just drop some more comments in Q&A or chat. All right, let's roll on, Sean. Strategy day. So a couple of points here. So we've already covered reviewing and confirming your current organizational strategy. So your operational plan, unless you're in the third year of the cycle and you're refreshing your, formally your whole strategy, you'll be doing a lighter touch review and checking it's fit for purpose. And so the two components of this I like to look at is I always like to have, as Stephen effectively taught me, this lovely, the most simple form of strategic plan, top 4 or 5 things the board agrees must be achieved over the next 2 to 3 years. And I always like to accompany that with a little strategic foundation, which reiterates in a very simple format, what's the purpose, our strategic identity, what's our vision, our purpose and our values, what's our unique value proposition, and a restatement of who our target market and a couple of bits and pieces like that. So those are the components. Do you want to roll on to the tips and then we'll bring in Stephen and Linda? Actually, no, we don't have any tips on this one. Go back up one, Sean. So perhaps we'll bring in Linda. Can you go back a slide? Thank you. Comment from you, Linda?
Well, I think you've sort of said it all, really. I mean, it is about identifying the outcomes you want to achieve in such a way as you can be very clear so that your people, when they're doing the operational plan on an annual basis, have no hesitancy about what it means. I also think that the risk to the achievement of those 4 to 5 things is critical. So actually don't forget risk and opportunity.
Oh, Linda, that's so good to mention that, because what we find is when people are developing up plans, including the operational plan, they'll look at the activity, but what's often missing is the risks associated. And the reason that risk is so important there is then you say, well, if we've identified the risks with this component of the operational plan, how can we leverage that? How can we turn that to advantage? How can we create opportunity for that? And where might the revenue streams be from understanding that risk? So I often describe risk as, you know, De Bono's seventh hat, you know, so you start to look at life through the lens of risk, not to be fearful of it, but to identify things you might have otherwise missed, which you can then do something about and really create and leverage opportunity from it. It's a mindset change, but it's hugely powerful throughout the organisation.
Cool. Let's go on to the budget. So what I like to do is I've always grappled with, you know, do you do your annual plan or your budget first? So what I like to do to give guidance to the team is have myself and my finance manager or CFO do a very simple first cut budget. It can be a single page. We just bucket things up. We don't itemize all of the line items. We'll have general and admin as 25% of revenue based on a formula based on last year, a little bit of intelligent, you know, goosing that up or down. And we provide that to the leadership team as they go about putting together their individual team plans. So I just like the simple framework that gives them some broad guidance to move ahead. Stephen.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue with budgets, and I've done them both ways. I've done them where we develop up the budget and then we work our plans to fit within the budget. And I'm much more leaning over the last 20 years to saying, well, what needs to be done now? How are we going to finance it? So I find many organisations still do the budget first and then work their plans within that particular budget. But the big problem with that is if the board have said, here are our strategies, here are the outcomes we're after, then they need to fund that. So if you need to go into a deficit budget, then you need to go into a deficit budget. That's why you've got retained earnings. But it has to be strategically focused, and there has to be a plan over, you know, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, so that we know that we might have to fund it for the first year, but after that there'll be some revenue coming in from it. But I think many boards, that when they look at a budget, the first thing they look to see, is it a balanced budget? Are we making a profit? Whereas what they should be looking at, is it achieving our strategic goals? Now let's look at the financial implications of that.
Yeah,
Linda?
that's sorry, Linda, I'll jump in there and then we'll bring you in. That's a really good point about that interplay between board and CEO. So way back when we're talking about the scope and restraints, you know, in some cases in our organisation, the board's been very clear. We've just raised money. We're aiming for a particular financial result. So we've broadly got constraints as to what we can do. So there's parameters over how much we can spend. And it's my job as CEO, if that's limiting or we can't achieve the strategic outcomes, is to be doing that negotiation, you know, with the board to, you know, get the appropriate funding. Can we bring you in, Linda?
I was just going to talk about the interplay with not-for-profits who are applying for funding through donor grants and the like, and especially in the cultural sector, for example, where in New Zealand the foundation has changed fundamentally over the last couple of years. And so as a board, you need to be very mindful of where your money's coming from and what hoops you have to jump through in order to get that money. And you need to be aware of that at the time you're developing your strategic outcomes, because there's no point in saying, okay, we're going to do A, B, and C, and then realize that actually the funding that you get from donors is delivering X, Y, and Z. And so they're not going to give you money to do A, B, and C. So it's a difficult time now, I think, and we need to be very cognizant of that.
Oh, I think there was a nice little dialogue of the dynamics of budgets or plan first. So can we go on, Sean? Righty-ho, tips. Staying with budgets here. So questions from the panel first. Shall we start? And can we encourage the participants today, the audience, to please put questions into the Q&A feature? But shall we start with you, Stephen? Anything here you want to comment on? Or?
Well, I'd like your thoughts on revenue models, because I hear that term being used a bit, but I'm not sure many people actually know what a revenue model looks like. And I know you grapple with this on a yearly, daily basis. So can you give us a bit of your take on what you mean by revenue model?
You might have caught me out with a bit of jargon there, Stephen. So, I've just, so out of the startup world, there's a wonderful playbook for building high growth startups. So one of the things bandied around is a revenue model, which for me is just as simple as is, how are we going to bring the income or the revenue in this year that we need? In our case, we deliver a lot of value to Mark in terms of content and pieces like this, which generates interest in our website, and a certain percentage of those flow through, as well as other activities and channels to market. So for me, our revenue model is just a simple representation. What are the key moving parts? What are some numbers and some conversion rates around that? And what does that spit through at the bottom in terms of expected revenue for this year? So it's as simple as that, Stephen.
Sounds like it would make a wonderful one-page reminder of, what is that sort of revenue stroke business model thing. That's a great idea.
Yeah, we never are short of potential topics. Anything you want to add on this slide here, Linda?
I want to ask a question, and it's similar in terms of the framing as Stephen's, in terms of ratios. I think a lot of people don't really know maybe what we're talking about when we talk about ratios.
Do you want to roll on, Linda, and talk about ratios?
No, I want you to tell me about ratios.
Okay,
I'm sure you know more than I do.
Okay, so as a ex-chartered accountant, so quite familiar with the financial world, ratios are wonderful little tools to, and unfortunately now as a CEO for a decade or two, I'm a little bit rusty on them, but there's lots of just little simple ratios, and one of the most simplest I use is just the major bucket. So we think about our business in terms of cost to serve, cost of acquisition of customers, general and administration, and research and development, sort of the four major areas of our business. So the most simple ratio we use is what is the percentage of each of those to revenue. So we use that as a very high level sort of mental model to go, we want to grow the business faster, so we're going to increase the percentage of cost of acquisition, effectively sales and marketing, as a percentage of revenue. So it's just a way of thinking about the business relative to revenue. So there's lots of different financial ratios out there. Most of our audience will have good chartered accountants in the background that would be delighted to give them assistance. There'll be material on the big 4 or 5 CA firms if you go through their websites. Anything you'd add on that, Stephen?
Yeah, look, ratios, I think a lot of people don't actually understand ratios, particularly boards, because you might get a ratio. So our liquidity ratio is, 1.3. And the most common question to that is, what the heck does that mean? So what? What do I need to know about that? So the key thing with ratios is identify those that are actually going to be useful to you, and then look to see what it was like last year, what it is this year, what you're projecting it to be, what the difference is, and what the acceptable and non-acceptable ranges for that ratio are. Now, in that one figure, then, you then have a wealth of information. I've got a really good article, Sean, if we want to send it out to people, on key ratios for not-for-profits in particular. And it's an old one, but it's a really good article that I think might just give people some ideas.
Great idea. Let's do that, Stephen.
Mm-hmm.
Right,
one other thing I was just going to mention is one of the easiest ratios, especially if, for example, you're working in a consultant space, is the ratio of profitability to revenue. And so if you keep an eye on that as just a simple thing to keep an eye on, it gives you a good steer on how effectively you're working.
Thanks, Linda. Okay. Yes, Stephen, we're getting a number of people asking for those articles, so great idea.
I saw that.
Brilliant. Let's roll on, Sean. Just checking with time. We've got about 15 minutes left. We're up to 6, so we're on track. So team goals and strategies. So we've talked about one. Actually, Sean, I think we've got those are budget related. I think we've got something missing there. Can you go to the next slide?
Mm-hmm.
We might have to ad lib this one. So yeah, so we'll just work off this one here. So as I said earlier, when I come to put together the plan for the year, I've already framed up I've already got my strategic plan. I've got some scope and restraints from the board. I've written a bit of a briefing document for my team leaders. And effectively, I will give them a template and say, look, I want a couple of slides with your objectives and key results for the next year. So effectively some goals, and I want some high level activities. You don't need any more than half a dozen. Fill your boots with them. They'll often go and do far more detailed planning, a marketing plan or a customer success team plan. It is an internal finer grained document, but I really want my team leaders to come back with a couple of high level slides, which is what I'll then present back to the board. So I don't see any need to do really detailed operational business plans beyond a small series of slides that links to the strategies and has some goals and activities and a budget for the organisation.
I think that, Brett, leads to also the discussion around the reporting to the board against the operational plan.
Please elaborate.
So don't is my suggestion there. I mean, the operational plan is there to help the staff really keep focused and to really, to drive the business and create the difference that the communities want from the work that you do. The reporting against it to the board primarily should be the agreed key ratios or the agreed key outcome measures and how close we're getting to those. And that could be simply a page, maybe even 2-page of some of these key things. Too often I see a 40-page report from all of the different departments celebrating how busy they've been, as opposed to the difference and how close we're getting to the outcomes that we agreed were really important at the start of the year. So I would really encourage all CEOs in particular to have a look at the reporting against the operations to identify what are the key metrics in there that will tell us whether or not we're on track, whether we're getting closer to what that is. And you can simply do it as a 1 or 2-page dashboard report. And then you're going to cut down your board pack hugely. If the board should know some of the operational detail, but one of the best ways of doing that is to give them a reinduction program every year or every 2 years and actually take them around to some of the programs rather than bore them to death with copious notes of how busy things are going from month to month to month. If they want to know more about the operations, which they should, then you make it available to them through either briefings or through actually visiting some of the programs so they can see what's going on.
Linda?
Well, I think that sums it up pretty nicely, really. There are some things that, as a board, you need to make sure you're across. And so if you have got funding from donors, then that will have criteria that as a board, you need to actually check in and make sure you're going to be actually meeting that criteria. So, it's about aligning everything and making sure you're not just getting information on finances, you're getting information on service expectations as well.
So I guess what you're saying, Stephen, is that there should be a lovely harmony between a strategic plan and an operational plan. And if there is, then management can go to effectively the highest form, the strategic, and just report against progress on the strategic plan.
Yeah, and then again, so that the directors don't feel that they're disengaged from the organisation, what can we put in place that engages our directors, which isn't just reporting, something that's a little bit more visceral?
I like it.
We should be, as directors, we should be doing site visits and things like that around health and safety. We should be getting out regularly to talk to staff. Yep. And so those sorts of things put into the context what we're actually overseeing as a board, don't they?
That's brilliant. You've triggered me, Stephen, to think we run one of our bigger teams is our customer success team. Wouldn't it be interesting to have my board come and spend a couple of hours and just sit and shadow a few of them, watch them at busier chat, look at the metrics, talk to the team leader? Because it's very difficult to, communicate life of the coalface when you're just doing it in a report, a written report. So it's very nice.
The best way that I've seen this described is that Blue Scope Steel, one of the largest based here in Australia and also the UK, every year they expect their directors to put on a high vis vest and go down into one of the mines, not to critique it, but just to, smell the smells and feel the feels and, just be part of, to understand that we're not just bits of paper and reports. This is part of what we do. This is our business.
Yeah. Well, at Wellington Water, we go out every second board meeting. So 4 or 5 times a year with our high vis on, going and actually doing health and safety chats, but actually it's much wider than that. So completely agree, Stephen.
Brilliant.
Brett, we have a question in here, Brett, so I'll read out.
Sure.
Would a corporate business plan for an organisation be similar to an operation plan?
Oh gosh, I'm going to make a comment and then invite the panelists in. So in my early years as CEO, I wrote 40 or 50-page business plans that combined strategy and operational plans and budgets, and wondered over the years why they never, board members don't want to read 50-page, and it's impossible in a 4-hour, 2 or 3 hour meeting, so I've come to the view of doing much simpler, plans. You can see in the handouts we've attached to this just how simple they are, what I would present. So no, I don't think they're particularly the same, but what do you think, Stephen? And let's start with you, Linda.
Look, I always have a difficulty with what things are called, and I would say a corporate plan and an operational plan are basically the same thing, but I could be wrong. I know I had a really interesting conversation with a client recently who had been asked by one of their board to do a corporate plan, and he came to me and said, "Well, I don't know what that is," and I had to admit to him, "Well, really, I'm not 100% sure myself. I mean, what is the outcome the board member's looking for?" And it sounded like an operational plan. So they might just call it a corporate plan.
Stephen?
Keep it simple. Next.
Right.
Well, this one here is more of a statement than a question from Paul O'Connor. Ideally, the CEO report on the operational plan will directly address the entity's strategic risks.
Yeah.
Operational and project risks can then be discussed with the audit and risk team. What's your view on that?
Well
Absolutely.
stated.
Well stated?
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice.
Question from Ella. What are your top tips for strategic planning for a brand new non-profit medical research organisation, and what key metrics would be on your list?
I'm going to hand that over to those of you that have managed not-for-profits.
Go, Linda.
Well, the first step is, in my view, is to actually very clearly identify your purpose. So what will the world have as a result of you? Once you've got your purpose, then you can start saying, okay, that's why we exist. Now let's actually start getting into what is it that actually defines what that success looks like. So,
very good.
Yeah, my starting point. Stephen?
Yeah, look, the key thing, I was just reading another comment that was made there by Andrew, who said that he distinguished it by the strat plan describes the what and the why, and the business plan the how and the when. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that, Andrew, which is one of the fun parts of doing this, is because the strat plan should also have the by, when, and what outcomes are we after. Too many organizations have a strat plan that has a list of projects over, and they call it strategic. So, but there's no accountability in there. My view is that the only way the board can really hold itself accountability is by its creation of the future. And one of the greatest documents to help create the future is your strategic plan. And if we're going to hold ourselves accountable, we can only hold ourselves accountable if we have timeframes and outcome measures directly linked to the strat plan over that 3-year period. And then your operational plan looks at, well, what are we going to do this year? What do we need to do next year to position ourselves for the year after that? So anyway, so that's just my thought on that. The other thing is with the strategic planning side of things, keep it really simple. Again, what are the top 3, maybe 4 key things that we've got to get right in the next 2 to 3 years that enable us to drive our vision forward based on what we know at the moment? And then realize that as soon as you write your strat plan, it's out of date. So you just got to get over that. And then, so annually you should be doing what's working, what's not, what have we missed, review of your strategy.
Oh, let's keep rolling. We'll see if we can bring home the last couple in the last 5 minutes or so we've got, have we, Sean?
Yep.
It'll be quicker than that because you allow you for the wrap up. So essentially what I like to do is present the draft plan to the board, where essentially the team leaders do the talking and the finance manager. I try and avoid in the meeting with the board I just want to get feedback from the board, which I reserve the right to take away, work with the leadership team and incorporate that, and then send them a final version. So if we're getting big gnarly questions on the day, we will probe and try and get views, but I'm not trying to answer, any particular hard questions from the board on the day. Just want to reserve the right to consider that and incorporate that or not into the plan. Any tips from you, Stephen?
I think you nailed it with that one.
Okay, let's roll on. We'll bring Linda in for the next one. So I think we've covered most of this already. Keep on going. Let's go to number 8. So then the finalization. So now this is where the CEO comes to the fore. So everything has been built up, presented to the board. You can now take the feedback of the board. If they're going, we want you to be more aggressive on your revenue target, you can update the budget. Any of the discussion that's rolled out can be synthesized together. And I like to test the board by, rather than having another session, just send it to them and just see if they will accept that. And if they want more feedback, then we'll have another session with them. So that's kind of my normal routine for finalising the whole process. Linda, any feedback on this?
No, I think it makes sense. I think one of the things that's lovely about this is that then this becomes the document that basically forms the chief executive's performance plan, in terms of the what that you require the chief executive to do, not the how, the culture side, but and so if you get it right, then it means there's no additional work in terms of actually holding your chief executive to account, and they are completely clear on what it is that they have to deliver on.
Very nice. That's a nice place to hand back to you. Sorry, Stephen, you want to have a last word?
I just wanted to add to that one there, and I think many organisations could do this but don't necessarily do it, and that is to tie all of this operational plan back into your risk appetite statement. So that when you're going to the board, you can say, we've actually looked at the risk appetite statement, and those that we've got a high risk appetite for, then you'll see there's a focus on those things. Those that we have a low risk appetite for either don't make it into our operational plan, or we've told you why we think this needs to be in there. But tying it back to the risk appetite statement just means that it's front and center for the board, that it should be a document that helps guide the staff to what's important.
Brilliant. Sean, I think we are closing in on time, are we?
We certainly are. Just a time for your wrap up, Brett.
Okay, so what would I say to this? We've covered the 8 steps today. Thank you to my panelists. It's some interesting stuff. I'm always learning as we go along. Every year I'm adapting this. I don't think I'd add anything more to this. It's kind of given you a broad overview. Please feel free to, if you wish to adopt these, customize them to your needs on the ground. Back to you, Sean.
Thanks, Brett. So that pretty much concludes our webinar today. Please feel free to connect with our presenters on LinkedIn. I'm sure they'll really look forward to your connection. We have a schedule of webinars over the next few weeks and months, and you can learn all about these. And the topics at boardpro.com/resource-center. Our next webinar on the 10th is titled Stakeholder Engagement for Boards, hosted by Chris Mene of Mene Solutions. Steve will also be attending there, as will Susan Hurrier. This will be a really informative topic, so please take a moment to consider an investment in that time. We also have a really great webinar on the 16th of November, specifically for nonprofits, titled What Good Governance for Nonprofits Looks Like, and this will be led by the very knowledgeable Joe Cribb. So as I mentioned in the opening, you'll receive an email from us very shortly, which will include a video of today's webinar, the presentation slides, the topic white paper, including the full set of planning templates, which are at the back of the document. So please feel free to share this information with your colleagues. And as I said, we'll also post this collateral and the webinar video on our Resource Centre page in the next couple of days. So as you leave the webinar, don't forget to complete our 1-minute survey and go into the draw for our beautiful hamper. We'll announce the winner shortly after the webinar today. Thank you all for your attendance. I really hope you enjoyed the session today. Thank you, Brett, Stephen, and Linda. It was really great to have you with us today. So thanks again, everybody. I look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.